Okay, let's get started then. Now, are folks seeing my slides okay?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, great. So, as you can see here, I'm sure most of us have done lots of VCs by now. I am recording. Feel free to put up your hand or unmute if you'd like to ask a question. I'll take questions kind of throughout. Otherwise, please do mute. And if you have any troubles with the audio or video, then let me know. All right, so I'll just dive right in, given we're a bit behind anyhow. So I'm here to talk about origin trials, which I'm hoping many of you have heard about. Briefly, what are they? They're a program for experimentation, right? So I won't go into too much detail because there's lots of links that explain it better. But basically, it's this way for us to iterate and get feedback from developers with the goal of building better features, right? Like, we can have great ideas for what a feature should do or how it should behave, but until developers actually try it, often in the wild, we don't really learn if it suits purposes. So that's kind of the general idea behind origin trials. It's to let us iterate and experiment with and avoid burn-in. So they've been around. We've been working on them since 2016. They were first aimed at experimenting with new features. So that's the what, but more recently we're using them for other things. And the one example I want to call out now is we've also started using them to enable us to deprecate features. So the great example and kind of the groundbreaker here was Web Components v0. So here you have this chicken and egg problem where you have a feature that we really want to deprecate, but it's got too high usage, will break sites. But while it's available, developers don't really have an incentive to move off of it. So with what I like to call deprecation trial, what we're doing is we actually remove the feature, but we use a trial as a way to turn it back on for people who sign up. So now you've got a time-limited period where folks are forced to move off of the feature, and we can slowly ramp down usage. So Mason Fried wrote up a great doc here about the experience going through this with Web Components v0. So I encourage you to look at that if you'd like to know more. So really what I'd like to talk to you is kind of what's new in origin trials, and we'll walk through a couple examples. But if you take one thing away from this presentation, it's really that we, like the origin trials team, the team supporting it, we want origin trials to help Chromium developers be able to iterate with new features, right? So we build things to make them better, easier to use. We want to help people through the process. So we're here to help in any way we can. So remember that, and some of these examples will hopefully show you, what we're about in that way. So in the last BlinkOn we had, BlinkOn 11, I did a similar presentation talking about what we were trying to do, and really it's about trying to increase the reach and effectiveness. So that means make them easier to use, make them possible to trial more things. In a perfect world, any type of Chromium feature you can imagine, we should be able to run an origin trial for. So we think kind of in order priority, we think about how can we make it easier for web developers, how can we make it easier for Chromium developers, and then finally, how can we just increase in general the amount of experimentation we can do, whether that's through process or policy updates. So what are a couple of things we've done in 2020? So one of the things we've heard a lot is, it's hard for third-party providers to participate in origin trials, right? So whether this is a CDN or whether it's, let's say, ad tech or you name it, right? Something you might have a provider who's embedded on a lot of first-party sites, but it's hard for them to participate in a trial. So this was possible, as you can kind of see in the image, if as a third-party provider you're willing to sign up for foo.com and bar.com and example.com, you can certainly inject a trial token and enable a trial, but that's not very feasible and it doesn't scale beyond a few sites. So what we've done is we've expanded the capability. So now you can register as a third party and you get a token for your own origin and you inject it in the same way we would inject tokens via script, but now it allows you to enable a trial across, you know, almost any origin on which your content is already embedded. And again, there's, you know, an article there that it kind of explains how it works, and you can read more if you're interested about the underlying design. But that's the general idea. So if we talk a little bit more about, well, okay, what does this look like if you're a Chromium developer and you want to do this? Well, in addition to what you would do today to integrate with the Origin Trials framework, you also have to explicitly configure third-party support. So it's again in the runtime enabled features JSON file, where today you'd set up an Origin trial name, then you add an additional flag to say, and yes, please, I would like this enabled for third parties. And then the other flip side is, with third-party Origin trials, obviously you were greatly increasing the reach. So we're still concerned about burn-in and use. So what we've done is we've added the ability to integrate with a field trial. And the goal here is, if the typical 0.5% of Chrome page loads limit, if that's too restrictive for what you're trying to do, and we've heard, for example, that as a third-party provider, I might need to enable the trial across a lot of websites to collect meaningful data. So maybe that 0.5% is too limiting. Well, instead, we've come up with an alternate usage limit, which we call kind of user exclusion, which means you configure a field trial, and that tells us how to segment the user base. But this will automatically hold back a small percentage, such that even if you have the token on a page and it would normally enable the trial, based on the field trial configuration, users will be excluded. So this is a way to ensure we don't burn in, because we can guarantee it won't be available to 100% of users. And then from a process perspective, we still need to make documentation updates and such. But the idea is, when you're filing your intent to experiment, you would explicitly say, and yes, I would like to enable this for third parties. So that's kind of part of a check and balance, you know, where API owners are aware, you know, that you're doing this for a trial, and we can make a judgment as to, you know, is that the right thing to do? And I think generally the answer would be yes, but we want to kind of have that opportunity to review that. So that's where we are right now. We've got, it's launched in 86. There's a couple, conversion measurement was the first trial to make use of it. So in the future, you know, again, this is what I would call an MVP. You know, we're looking at, okay, today to enable it, you have to inject your trial token via script. Are there better ways we can enable this? For example, you know, supporting HTTP headers like we do for regular first-party tokens. And the other thing we've started design and exploring on is having explicit approval of registrations. So again, third-party trials, you know, expand the reach a whole lot. And so maybe we want to make sure that the people that are signing up are going to use the trial properly. And so the idea here is, you know, with some transparent and public criteria, we would evaluate people to say, we would evaluate websites to say, yes, that looks, you know, you meet the criteria, you're able to use a third-party token. And in some cases, we might say, well, no, here's, you know, this isn't a good fit, right? So again, it'd be open to everyone, but we just might want to apply a higher level of scrutiny on people who are using the trial. So that's third-party trials. The other thing we've heard a whole lot about is that the 6-week renewal, these short-lived tokens, can be really painful, especially for developers that have, let's say, a complex or lengthy rollout process. So, you know, this could be enterprise developers, it could be anyone, but someone who says, well, you know, we need to go through a canary process where we roll out incrementally, or maybe our infrastructure is such that it's actually pretty complicated to make a change, you know, whether it's a header or a meta tag. And so that means that having to do this every 6 weeks is really painful, especially, you know, if it takes you a couple days of effort to do this. So coming soon, we're aiming to have this out in December, is we're going to allow, rather than renewal requiring a new token, we're going to allow you to do it with an existing token. So the general idea, you sign up, you get a token that lasts for the length of the trial instead of 6 weeks, and you're still required to provide feedback. And what we'll do is we'll use if you provide feedback, then everything's fine. Your token continues to work. If you don't provide feedback, then we'll actually disable your token. So it'll have the same net effect, which is if you don't renew, your token doesn't work, but we're just hoping to really reduce the pain and friction. So if you're interested in this, you can follow along on that CR bug there. And this is all largely going to be a server-side feature. We'll make some tweaks to the Origin Trials developer console. Developers will have to sign up for this special token, but other than that, it should just work, and no effort required for Chromium developers, feature teams that are running the trial. And the other thing we did was we added support for CSS features. So that in the past, this wasn't possible. Now you say, well, I have a new CSS property or some kind of feature. I want to run an Origin trial for it. It's now possible to do this with some basic configuration, which is covered in the integration guide. But this supports a lot of the things you would hope. It controls whether the property is parsed or not, or treated as unrecognized. You can do that supports in your style sheets or even through JavaScript, and it even works with media queries. So this was really driven by the display locking trial, and I think this is great in terms of expanding the reach again, right? We want all kinds of features to be able to run trials. So I just want to call out a few process changes. Now, this again, with Origin trials, it's a program for iteration. So there's this tension between wanting to enable as many people as possible to experiment with a feature. And then at the same time, we're very concerned with making sure Origin trials aren't a kind of lightweight ship tool, a way to kind of sidestep the Blink launch process. So given those constraints, what can we do to make this work better for everyone? And so one of the things that's commonly come up is this idea we have a required breakage period by default. So if your trial ends in milestone N and you're shipping the feature by default in N+1, we'll have a week or so where the Origin trial stops working to enforce breakage, and that's to make sure that we're doing the right things in terms of making changes to the feature or the API design, and we're not avoiding breaking changes just because it would be painful for the small number of developers that were participating in the trial. Now, we've heard that can be a barrier to folks wanting to make the investment to participate in the trial. So I say we, the royal we, this is not the Origin trials team necessarily, this is kind of what the API owners have worked out. But so now it's possible to request when you're on your intent to ship to say, I'd like to ship without having this breakage period. And so what that means is if the API owners approve, we'll make sure the trial end date will extend past, kind of when the feature ships by default. So developers that have already signed up and, provided feedback and invested in the feature can continue to use the feature until it's widely available. And I won't go into all the criteria. You can kind of read the PSA there. And then the other interesting one is, again, I talked about the 0.5 usage limits. And so we've picked that limit, again, to prevent burn-in. And so, but in some cases, again, we might need to see broader usage to collect meaningful data. And so the API owners have kind of decided with 3 LGTMs, meaning greater scrutiny, they can approve exceptions to that usage limit where it's warranted for the specific circumstances of the trial. Now, we're another year in. Like I said, we've kind of been running this since 2016, and we've seen a lot of trials. And so I just wanted to call out some tips and best practices because, we've seen patterns, we've seen things that work, we've seen things that don't work so great. And so I just wanted to highlight a couple here as for folks that are thinking about running a trial. So a big one we see is, the example is someone will say, oh, I want to run a trial, and typically we'll say we'll run a trial for 3 milestones, but say, no, I just need to run it for 1 milestone. I just need 4 or 5 weeks to collect some data, and that's all we need. We will often suggest, well, why don't you just run it for 3 milestones? You can always end early. Because what we've found is teams will say, no, we just need a few weeks. We're going to collect some data with our partner. But then it turns out, there's a delay on the partner side in terms of deploying code that uses the feature, or maybe there's a bug in the feature itself, and that means it's not quite ready for the partner to use. And then they end up having to say, oh, well, we weren't able to collect enough data before the trial ended. Now we need to go and extend it. So, like I said, if you are going to do that, whether it's a short trial, whether it's a regular trial, really make sure you have your partners lined up if you have specific ones, and not just, yeah, we're going to use a feature, but have they actually written the code to try out your new feature? Are they ready to deploy it? These kind of things can really, avoid this awkwardness of, oh, now we're releasing, we haven't got any data yet. And related to that is also plan ahead if you think you're going to want to extend the trial. The API owners have kind of been fairly consistent in applying a cap on how long a trial runs. So again, going back to origin trials are not a way to ship features. So, 6 milestones is kind of a rough rule of thumb. If you expect to really need to experiment over a long period of time, then you should really be thinking about, when is the right time to run this experiment? Can I do it in blocks? Because the API owners will push back on having a trial run for a long time. So, again, this is kind of correlated to the first part, but plan ahead for how long you need your trial to run to experiment meaningfully. And then the other thing is, you want to think about ahead of time, what kind of feedback do you want, whether it's from partners or developers, and how might you need that to support your ship when you're ready to ship your feature. And so, obviously it's generally easier to collect this feedback as you go. And so what I'm thinking about here and what we've been iterating on is kind of having a form, if you will, or a doc, like, hey, partner, can you fill out this doc and let us know what we can share? Because if you're working with, certain companies, they might not want to publicize certain parts of their participation in trial or not, right? So if you think about that up front and you collect that feedback during the trial, when it's fresh, then you can have that at the ready to share. Like if API owners are asking, well, is the trial useful? Did it solve the problem? Again, we collect feedback on surveys. That can be a little bit trickier to share publicly, whereas if you can get a testimonial from 1 or 2 partners, that can be really effective. And I just want to call out a few things that I think are underutilized and can have the potential to make your trial go better. One, we can customize feedback surveys. We've done this in the past. We have a template we use, but there's no reason why, if in your particular feature you wanted to collect very specific questions, if you want to have a certain flow, like if they answered this question this way, then we'll ask them some additional questions. That's all possible with the survey software we use. Just let us know. Second, again, we can help you contact registered developers basically at any time. So whether you want to send out like an email blast to everyone that's registered, whether you're looking at who's signed up and you want to reach out to individuals, this is something we can help with. And kind of finally, I want to end with, where are we headed in 2021? So again, the goal here is to make it easy to use and increase the reach. So we think about pain points we've heard about. We're identifying gaps. So, for example, some of the things that are pretty high on our likely to-do list, adding support for web views. Right now, origin trials are not enabled on web views on Android, but certainly for deprecations, that could be super useful, and even for new features, so we're looking at that. We're looking at kind of having a more regular process of sending out updates to registrants. So think, for example, if your feature is changing from release to release and you want to let people know, then we can kind of have a low overhead way to just send out an update on each Chrome milestone. And then, there's another talk going on about Chrome status, but we're really looking at how we can integrate origin trials and Chrome status to streamline the overall process of launching features. And then there's other pain points that we've heard before and we're still thinking about, so things like token management, right? Especially for enterprise developers where, it's not one person, maybe it's a team. So can we share registrations? To make it so you're not reliant on one person's inbox? And again, things we hear from Chromium developer as well. So the big thing is, please tell us if there's anything we can do to help make your life easier with Origin trials or to make it more successful. And finally, places where you can find us or find out more. And that's about it. So we have a few minutes. If there are questions, I'm happy to take them. You can just either raise your hand or go ahead and unmute. I'm just going to stop presenting. Go ahead, Thomas. I think I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so I would like to understand more about the time limit and what it would involve to kind of extend that as part of the official process. Are there conditions under which we could see having really long trials, including ones where we're making, breaking changes version to version, but, continuing it for as long as like half a year to a year?
Yeah, so this is one that has come up before, and so I think I just want to check for reference. And this is really, so we've had a WebVR or WebXR are kind of the example that we point to, where we kept extending, and probably not an ideal situation. So we're generally eager to avoid missteps like that one. So Matt Guka he's been talking about this proposal kind of called origin keys, which again is getting at a similar maybe but related problem where we're maybe not ready to ship, but we still want to make the feature available. So I don't have a short and easy answer. I think we need to thread the needle in terms of, yes, we realize there's an investment in getting developers to integrate with features and to sign up to participate for trials. And so for them to see a return on that investment, they're going to want to be able to use the feature or want to know that it's going to ship or not go away on them. And so on the flip side, there's we have a Blink launch process, right? We want to ship features, and so we need to be careful about Origin trials being a way out, either to avoid going through the rigor that we need in the launch process, or as a kind of encouragement to just defer doing that launch work, right? Because I think Rick Byers would say a lot, we shouldn't be afraid to take risks, and I would kind of agree, like, is there a reason why we can't just ship it? Origin trials don't always have to be a step before shipping if you know really where you want to get to, and granted there's lots of features that don't. So that's not a satisfying answer, but I think it's really, how do we balance kind of the tension between wanting to ship and wanting to do the right things, right?
Yeah, it's a discussion that I'd love to continue. I do think that there's this kind of like almost like sweet spot where, like, yes, Origin trials aren't a way to avoid the Blink launch process, so you'll always have to go through that. But once you launch, you're kind of stable and you can't make breaking changes. And that's one of the wonderful things about Origin trials, is that you can still make breaking changes because you have that kind of like contract with the adopters and partners. Mm-hmm. And so if you're not ready to ship for whatever reason, maybe the standard like doesn't have multiple implementation, as is in the case of some CGs that require that, or WGs, but also just you want to keep improving it, but you also want to get it into the hands of partners like now. And that's the spot that I think can be easily served by Origin trials, but currently isn't.
Yeah. So I think the right answer is what you said there. Like, I don't have an answer, but we should continue the conversation. And like I said, there's the Origin keys, which is maybe coming at it from a slightly different take. But this is not a new problem, so we really come up with a way that doesn't involve, forcing feature teams to beg for exceptions or wondering about how do I make this happen, or not being able to give partners like a clear answer or set expectations appropriately, right? Like, so those are problems we need to solve.
Absolutely. And as somebody who's gone through a lot of these, like, I definitely appreciate the challenge of finding a system and a set of rules that apply across the board, and yet also it kind of makes rules like room for those kinds of exceptions. I think that's hard. Sorry, I know we're over time. So stop talking.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I want to let people have a break before the next one, but I'm happy to answer another question or two before we kind of officially wrap up. Or again, we can continue. We can, set up another meeting or continue on Slack or whatever. But I don't know if people have another immediately.
I had a quick question, if that's okay. I was wondering, what does an exit plan look like from the origin trial? Are there any guidelines that I could find somewhere?
Yeah, so I think the best answer we have right now is the Blink launch process. So that was revamped earlier this year to kind of lay out the path. And so really, I'd say it's less about my perspective anyhow. It's less about, okay, we start an origin trial and then we figure out when we exit. It's kind of, what is my overall plan for getting to shipping? And then origin trials fits into that, right? So, the goal, ideally with the goal of the origin trials is, okay, there's something we need to learn or more things we need to learn. So we're going to run a trial so we can get in people's hands and they can tell us, right? We can learn these things. Then we apply those things to what we ultimately end up shipping, or we apply that learnings to the standards process. So it's, and I think this goes to Thomas's thing about, ideally it's not open-ended, right? But maybe, maybe it is, right? So I tend to think of it as, what are we going to learn by running this in the wild? Like that, where that's the only way to learn is by running an origin trial. So I'm not sure if that's the short answer I can give, I guess. I'm not sure if that's helpful.
My question was a little different. The thing is, my team is already running an origin trial, and so I was figuring out, what the exit plan would look like so I can help facilitate that.
Right. Okay. Maybe what I'd suggest is, why don't maybe we should connect separately and you can walk me through your specific scenario, and maybe I can give better, more targeted advice, because we don't have necessarily here's like a written guide about here's how you exit. We probably should, but I would say we don't right now.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, great. Why don't we end there, so folks can get to the next spot on the schedule. And like I said, hit me up on email or find me, we can connect in Slack or whatever. All right. Okay, thanks everyone.